The world insists on calling it bad luck. The news anchors use solemn tones. They speak of unprecedented weather patterns and tragic coincidences. A building collapses during a minor tremor, and they blame the earth for shaking. A fire consumes a luxury hotel, and they blame a faulty wire, an act of God. A bridge gives way, sending cars and their occupants into the dark water below, and they call it a structural failure of time, a consequence of age. These are the stories we are told. They are neat, contained explanations for horrors that feel too large to comprehend. They are the lies that allow society to function, to wake up each morning and pretend that the ground beneath our feet is solid and dependable. But the ground is not solid. It is eroding from within. The rot began slowly, a quiet decay in the unseen foundations of our world. It started with a small bribe, a faked license, a safety inspection that never happened. It grew with each handshake in a shadowy room, with each document stamped approved for a price. Now, the decay is no longer quiet. It screams. It screams in the sirens that wail through the streets, in the cries of those who have lost everything to a disaster that was preventable. The chaos is not an accident. It is a design, a system built on the flimsy scaffolding of greed and negligence, destined to fall. The veneer of bad luck is cracking under the strain. What they don't tell you on the news is that the architect who designed the collapsed high-rise bought his credentials. The fire chief who oversaw the hotel's safety protocols was a political appointee with no experience. The inspector who signed off on the doomed bridge did so in exchange for a favor. These are not isolated incidents of human failing. They are the predictable outcomes of a system where merit has been sold to the highest bidder. The soil turns to dust because protected lands were sold to corporations. The water is poisoned because regulations were ignored. The hospitals are full because the food is contaminated. This is the reality hidden behind the headlines, the truth that festers just beneath the surface. This is the world Elisa inhabits, a world that stole her father. He was in his car on that bridge on his way home. The official report was swift and conclusive, a tragic accident. But Elisa knows better. She saw the cracks long before the bridge fell, not just in the concrete, but in the society that was supposed to maintain it. She has seen the same pattern repeat itself over and over: a fire, a flood, a collapse. Each event is presented as a singular tragedy, a stroke of terrible misfortune. But Elisa sees the connections. She sees the rotten roots that connect them all, a vast, tangled network of corruption that is slowly, methodically pulling everything down into ruin. Elisa lives in the quiet aftermath of her personal apocalypse. Her father's absence is a constant, hollow ache in her life, a space that can never be filled. While others grieve and move on, accepting the official narrative, Elisa cannot. For her, acceptance would be a betrayal. It would mean agreeing with the lie that took him. So she searches for a different kind of solace, not in closure, but in clarity. A brilliant data analyst, now unemployed and ostracized for asking too many questions, she has turned her grief into a relentless, obsessive quest for truth. Her small apartment has become a command center, a sanctuary of information in a city built on deceit. The walls are lined with maps and charts, a constellation of tragedy. Every news report, every public record, every leaked document, and every social media whisper becomes a piece of her puzzle. She is a digital archivist of the apocalypse, collecting the fragments of a broken world. She spends her days and nights sifting through terabytes of data, searching for the ghosts in the machine. She tracks the flow of money, the appointments of officials, the awarding of contracts. She cross-references names, dates, and locations. To an outsider, it would look like madness, the desperate scribblings of a paranoid mind. But to Elisa, it is the only sane response to the madness that surrounds her. She is not just looking for evidence, she is mapping the anatomy of the rot. She traces the line from a collapsed building back to the shell corporation that supplied the faulty steel. She follows that corporation's ownership to a powerful magnate. She discovers that the judge who dismissed the safety lawsuit against the magnate was appointed after a hefty political donation. Each connection is a cold, hard fact, a node in a terrifying network. It is a web of complicity that stretches across every sector of society, from construction and law to food production and healthcare. The system isn't just broken, it is functioning exactly as its architects intended. It is a machine designed to generate profit for the few at the expense of the many. This is not just an intellectual exercise for Elisa, it is a memorial. Every connection she uncovers is a testament to her father's stolen life and the countless others lost to the same pervasive decay. She believes that somewhere within this mountain of data lies an irrefutable truth, a pattern so clear and so damning that no one can deny it. She is searching for the source code of the chaos, the algorithm of injustice. She does not yet know what she will find, but she feels it closing in. A truth more terrible than simple corruption, a cycle of consequence that is beginning to turn on the very people who set it in motion. In this city, the air itself feels transactional. Every interaction is a negotiation, a subtle dance of power and influence. The official currency is the lira, but the real currency is favors. It is the language everyone understands, from the street vendor paying a small bribe to keep his spot to the corporate executive securing $1 billion contract. This unspoken system has its own logic, its own brutal efficiency. Merit is a quaint, outdated concept, like a forgotten dialect. What matters is who you know, who you owe, and who owes you. It is a fragile ecosystem built on mutual complicity, a shared understanding that the rules are for those without the means to break them. The normalization of this decay is the most insidious part. People have learned to navigate it. They know which official's palm to grease for a permit. They know which clinic has doctors with real degrees. They factor in the cost of corruption as a daily expense, like bread or electricity. A broken water pipe in the street might stay broken for weeks. A geyser of wasted resources, it will only be fixed when the right person complains or when a sufficient payment is made to the municipal office. The public has become accustomed to the failure of public services. They expect it. This acceptance is a form of surrender, a quiet, collective sigh of resignation that allows the rot to spread. This system creates a parallel reality. There is the official world of laws, regulations, and procedures, a world that exists only on paper. Then there is the real world, governed by the invisible hand of influence. A driver's license can be bought, a building permit can be forged, a criminal record can be erased. For the right price, reality itself is negotiable. This creates a pervasive sense of uncertainty. You can never be sure if the pilot flying your plane is qualified, if the medicine you are taking is genuine, or if the bridge you are crossing is safe. Life becomes a game of chance, where the odds are stacked against the honest and the unconnected. The personal cost of this chaos is paid in small daily installments of fear and anxiety. It is the mother who boils her water twice, unsure of its purity. It is the student who knows his grades are meaningless next to the connections of his peers. It is the old man who avoids the hospital, fearing the incompetence within its walls more than the illness in his body. This is not the dramatic collapse seen on the news. It is a slow, grinding erosion of trust, of hope, of the basic social contract. It is the silent suffering of millions, each bearing their own small piece of a much larger systemic failure, a quiet tragedy unfolding in every home. Education was once the great equalizer. It was the path to a better life, a promise that hard work and intelligence would be rewarded. Now, the universities are just another marketplace. Seats in prestigious programs are sold to the children of the wealthy and powerful. Diplomas are printed for students who have never attended a class. Professors who protest are silenced or replaced. The very idea of knowledge has been devalued, reduced to a commodity. A degree is no longer a testament to one's learning, it is merely a proof of purchase, a symbol of one's family status and their ability to navigate the corrupt system. The rot begins here, in the very institutions meant to shape the future. The consequences ripple outward, poisoning every profession. Hospitals are staffed by surgeons who cheated on their exams, their hands unsteady and their knowledge dangerously thin. They follow procedures from outdated textbooks, their confidence a mask for a terrifying lack of skill. Law firms hire attorneys who bought their way through law school, unable to form a coherent argument, but skilled in the art of the bribe. These professionals are cogs in the machine. Their fake credentials are prerequisite for entry into a system that rewards obedience over competence. They are the smiling, confident face of a deep and pervasive institutional decay. Consider the story of Dr. Aris. He works in the city's main emergency room. His diploma hangs proudly on his office wall, a perfect forgery. He secured his position not through years of grueling study, but through a generous donation from his father to the hospital's director. He looks the part. He wears the white coat. He speaks with authority. But when a patient presents with unusual symptoms, a flicker of panic crosses his eyes. He defaults to the simplest diagnosis, prescribing common antibiotics for a complex infection. He is a gambler playing with human lives, and he is not the only one. The hospital is filled with ghosts like him, hollow professionals haunting the halls of medicine. This hollowing out of expertise creates a world of profound risk. Every day, people place their lives and the lives of their loved ones into the hands of these unqualified pretenders. They trust the title, the uniform, the institution. They believe in the veneer of legitimacy. But beneath the surface, a deadly game is being played. The fake architect uses cheaper materials to cut costs. The fake engineer signs off on a flawed design. The fake doctor misreads a critical lab result. Each act of incompetence, born from a fraudulent education, adds another crack to the foundation of society. It is only a matter of time before the whole structure comes crashing down. The decay is visible even in the simplest of pleasures, like a meal at a restaurant. Once the city's culinary scene was vibrant, a source of pride. Now, dining out is honestly an act of faith. The supply chain is a web of deceit. A restaurant owner pays a bribe to a health inspector who signs off on a dirty kitchen without a second glance. The meat supplier pays a bribe to a government official to mislabel their product, passing off low-grade meat as prime cuts. The farmer who grows the vegetables uses banned pesticides, paying a bribe to ensure his produce passes inspection and reaches the market. Every plate of food is a potential vector for illness. Alex, the magnate, often dines at the Gilded Cage, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. He doesn't know, or perhaps doesn't care, that its pristine reputation is built on a foundation of corruption that he himself helps to sustain. The restaurant sources its produce from a company that is a subsidiary of a larger agricultural corporation. Alex's investment firm holds a major stake in that corporation. He helped them secure government contracts and bypass environmental regulations. The fish served as the evening special comes from waters tainted by industrial runoff from a factory that one of his companies owns. He is, in a very real sense, consuming the fruits of his own corruption. For now, he is insulated from the immediate consequences. His body is strong. His chefs are skilled at masking the poor quality of the ingredients with rich sauces and elaborate preparations. He eats his meal, discusses business, and feels the familiar sense of power and control. He is the master of his universe. He sees the system not as rotten, but as efficient. It works for him. He cannot see the invisible chain of causality that links his investment portfolio to the plate of food in front of him. He is blind to the fact that the poison he helps pump into the world is slowly making its way back to his own table. This is the great irony of the system he champions. The powerful believe they can exist above the chaos they create. They build walls of wealth and influence to protect themselves and their families. They eat at exclusive restaurants, drink bottled water, and live in guarded compounds. But the rot is pervasive. It seeps through the cracks. It contaminates the very luxuries they use to isolate themselves. The contaminated soil yields tainted vegetables. The polluted water poisons the fish. Alex believes he is dining in a sanctuary, but he is sitting in the heart of the disease, blissfully unaware that he is being served a slow-acting poison of his own making. The consequences are not always as dramatic as a collapsed building. They are often silent, creeping, and invisible. The water from the tap has a faint, metallic taste. The air in the city burns the lungs on hot days. The food in the markets looks fresh, but it carries an unseen burden of chemicals and bacteria. This slow poisoning of the environment is a direct result of 1,000 corrupt deals. It is an environmental official looking the other way as a factory dumps waste into a river. It is a politician selling off protected forest land to a mining company. It is a system that values short-term profit above the long-term health of the land and its people. The result is a public health crisis unfolding in slow motion. Hospitals are seeing a rise in inexplicable illnesses. Cancers, once rare, are now common. Children are developing asthma and severe allergies at alarming rates. Doctors, many of whom are unqualified, are overwhelmed. They treat the symptoms, but they are powerless to address the cause. They prescribe inhalers and allergy medications, but they cannot clean the air. They treat stomach infections, but they cannot purify the food supply. They are fighting a war on 100 fronts, a war they are destined to lose because the enemy is the very environment their patients live in. Elisa sees this in her data. She maps the locations of polluting factories and cross-references them with public health statistics. The patterns are undeniable. Clusters of respiratory illnesses appear downwind from industrial zones. Spikes in gastrointestinal disease correlate with agricultural areas known for using banned pesticides. She sees the slow, methodical poisoning of the population as a statistical certainty. It is not bad luck or genetics. It is a predictable outcome of a system that has declared war on nature for profit. The land itself is crying out, its pain expressed in the sickness of its people. The architects of this system believe they are immune. They drink imported water, eat organic food, and take vacations in pristine locations far from the city's smog. Alex is no different. He ensures his own family is protected by a shield of wealth, but the shield is full of holes. His son attends a university where the food is supplied by the same corrupt contractors who serve the rest of the city. His daughter plays in a park near a highway thick with the exhaust of unregulated vehicles. They breathe the same air. They are vulnerable. The contamination is not selective. It is a rising tide, and it is only a matter of time before it breaches their walls and floods their perfect world. Elisa's mission begins not with a single revelation, but with the painstaking process of connecting disparate points of data. She works like a cartographer of a forgotten land, charting the hidden geography of corruption. Her monitors glow with network graphs, intricate webs where each node is a person, a company, or a disaster. She starts with what she knows, the bridge that killed her father. The official report cited metal fatigue, a simple, sterile explanation. But Elisa digs deeper. She pulls the public contracts for the bridge's construction and its subsequent maintenance records, many of them heavily redacted. She spends weeks cross-referencing the shell companies listed as suppliers, peeling back layers of corporate ownership like an onion. What she uncovers is a deliberate trail of obfuscation. The steel was supplied by a company that dissolved just months after the project's completion. The chief inspector who signed off on the final report, a man named Barren, retired to a lavish coastal villa far beyond the means of a public servant. Elisa maps his known associates, his financial history, the faint digital footprints he left behind. A pattern begins to emerge. Barren received a significant unexplained payment from an offshore account. The account is linked to a larger holding company. That holding company, she discovers with a jolt, is a subsidiary of Alex's corporate empire. The connection is no longer a suspicion, it is a solid line on her map. This single discovery becomes her Rosetta Stone. It provides the key to deciphering other tragedies. She turns her attention to the high-rise that collapsed during the earthquake. The architect was a fraud, his license a forgery. But who hired him? Who benefited from the use of substandard materials? Elisa pulls the property records, the investment portfolios, the political donation logs. Again, the threads lead back to the same dark star in her constellation, Alex. His real estate division had financed the project, and the fraudulent architect was the nephew of a city councilman who had approved Alex's zoning permits for another lucrative deal. It wasn't just greed, it was a closed loop of favors and kickbacks. Each disaster she investigates tells a similar story. A hotel fire, a factory explosion, a contaminated water crisis. Each event, presented to the public as a separate and unfortunate accident, is connected beneath the surface. They are not random acts of fate. They are the calculated outcomes of a system designed for profit at any cost. Elisa's map grows more complex with each passing day. It is a horrifying tapestry woven from bribery, nepotism, and negligence. She is no longer just investigating her father's death. She is charting the anatomy of a society that is systematically destroying itself from within, one corrupt decision at a time. As Elisa populates her map, she begins to notice something more disturbing than just a simple network of corruption. She starts to see echoes. A name from an old investigation reappears in a completely new context. A company she flagged in a construction scandal turns up years later in an agricultural deal. The actors in this drama of decay are, honestly, a small and recurring cast. A judge who dismisses a crucial lawsuit later appears at a political fundraiser for a senator who weakens environmental laws. That same senator's brother is then appointed to head the very environmental agency he helped to cripple. The system doesn't just enable corruption, it recycles its agents, moving them around like pieces on a chessboard. She starts a new kind of analysis, looking not just at direct connections, but at the temporal and relational distance between events. She focuses on the recent forest fire that dominated the news. The official narrative blamed a drought, but Elisa finds the truth buried in budget reports. The forestry department's funding for fire prevention had been slashed by 70%. The director of the department, Ahmet, was a political appointee with absolutely no forestry experience. He got the job simply because his uncle was a powerful judge. Elisa's heart quickens. She recognizes the judge's name. He was the same judge who, years ago, had acquitted a notorious slumlord after a deadly tenement fire. This connection feels, well, different. It is not a direct line of financial profit. It is something else, a strange resonance across time. Why would a judge's decision in an urban arson case have any bearing on a forest fire years later? She continues to dig, driven by this nagging curiosity. She investigates the slumlord the judge had freed. After his acquittal, the man had used his newfound freedom and wealth to invest in various enterprises, including a timber company. That company had heavily lobbied the new, inexperienced forestry director Ahmet for access to protected lands, access they were granted. The forest fire had started near one of their illegal logging operations. The chain is complete, yet its shape is bizarre. The judge's corrupt act to free a slumlord indirectly led to the appointment of his own nephew, who was then influenced by the very criminal the judge had set free. The consequence of the lie had not been a simple, linear event. It had echoed through the system, reverberating for years before manifesting as a new disaster. Elisa sits back from her screen, a chill running down her spine. The system wasn't just a network, it was an echo chamber, where the consequences of a single act of corruption could amplify and return in a completely unexpected and, honestly, terrifying new form. The discovery of the echo chamber shifts Elisa's entire perspective. She had been looking for a conspiracy, a cabal of powerful people intentionally causing harm for profit. But what she is seeing is something more chaotic and, in a way, more frightening. It isn't always a master plan. It is a system that has developed a life of its own. It is a machine that, once set in motion, runs on the fuel of incompetence and greed, generating disasters as a byproduct. The people within the system, like the judge or the forestry director, are not necessarily evil masterminds. They are simply acting in their own self-interest, blind to the long-term, cascading effects of their choices. She begins to formulate a new theory. She calls it the repercussion cycle. Her hypothesis is simple. In a closed system where merit is absent, every act of corruption creates a debt. This debt is not financial, it is a debt to chaos. It introduces a point of failure, a weakness into the societal fabric. A fake doctor, a corrupt judge, a faulty steel beam, each one is a small tear. And as these tears accumulate, the probability of catastrophic failure increases exponentially. But the most terrifying part of her theory is the cycle. The chaos created by these acts does not dissipate randomly. It flows along the very networks of corruption that created it. Elisa starts testing her theory with data. She runs simulations, building predictive models based on the connections she has mapped. She inputs the data from the collapsed bridge and the corrupt inspector, Barren. Her model predicts a higher probability of a future failure in any system Barren's ill-gotten wealth has touched. She follows the money. Barren invested his bribe money into a food processing company. Months later, that same company was at the center of a salmonella outbreak. The connection is correlational, not definitively causal, but the pattern is just too frequent to be a coincidence. The money earned from one disaster was funding the next. She realizes she is witnessing a form of systemic karma, but stripped of any mysticism. It is a sociological and statistical inevitability. The system of corruption is also a system of connection. When you release poison into that system, it is bound to flow back to you or those connected to you. The corrupt official who approves a faulty building has a child who eats contaminated food produced by a company that bribed its way past safety checks. It is a perfect, horrifying loop. The chaos is no longer a bug in the system. It is a self-sustaining, self-correcting feature, and its primary function is to punish the architects of its existence. The repercussion cycle is not just a theory. Elisa sees it playing out in real time, with a chilling and unsettling symmetry. The patterns are becoming clearer, the connections more direct and, honestly, more ironic. She uncovers the story of the corrupt fire chief, a man named Costa, who was appointed for political reasons. Years ago, he had failed to enforce safety codes at a luxury hotel, leading to a devastating fire that killed dozens of people. The hotel owner, a cousin of Alex, had paid a hefty bribe to Costa to ignore the violations. Costa took the money, lived well, and forgot about the tragedy. The system had rewarded his negligence, but the cycle had not forgotten. Recently, Costa's family was caught in the massive forest fire, the same fire overseen by the incompetent director Ahmet. They were trapped in a vacation home in a small town, the escape routes cut off by the blaze. The fire services were overwhelmed, their response slow and ineffective, a direct result of the budget cuts and poor leadership for which Ahmet was responsible. The fire chief, who had built his career on ignoring safety codes for a price, now found his own family at the mercy of a different branch of the same broken system. The incompetence he had once profited from was now threatening to consume his loved ones. The symmetry is what unnerves Elisa the most. It feels almost poetic, like a dark fable written in the language of data. The judge who accepted a bribe to release a violent murderer from prison later saw his own son become a victim of random street violence committed by that very same man. The architect who used fake credentials and substandard materials to build the collapsed high-rise had a daughter who was severely injured when a poorly maintained public balcony gave way. The consequences were not random. They were thematically linked to the original crime. They were a perfect, cruel reflection of the initial sin. This is the truth Elisa now holds, a truth she believes is irrefutable. The chaos is not just a cycle, it is a mirror. It forces the powerful to see the consequences of their actions not on strangers in the news, but on the faces of their own family. The system of corruption they built to enrich and protect themselves has become their greatest threat. It is, in a way, a self-devouring snake. Elisa knows she cannot fight this system with protests or appeals to morality. She must fight it with its own cold logic. She must find the one person who embodies the entire system and show him the reflection in the mirror before it is too late. Judge Ferren was a man who believed in the flexibility of justice. To him, the law was not a rigid code of ethics, but, a set of negotiable guidelines. He saw himself as a pragmatist, someone who really understood the true mechanics of power in the city. Years ago, he presided over the case of a violent career criminal, a man accused of a brutal murder. The evidence was overwhelming, a conviction all but certain, but the criminal's family was wealthy and well-connected. They made Ferren an offer he considered both practical and lucrative. For a price, he would ensure a key piece of evidence was deemed inadmissible. He did so, and the murderer walked free. Ferren never lost sleep over his decision. He rationalized it as a necessary compromise, a small concession to maintain his standing and influence within the city's elite circles. The money he received allowed him to secure a comfortable life for his family, sending his son to the best private schools and ensuring their home was in the safest, most exclusive neighborhood. He had traded one man's freedom for his family's security, a bargain that seemed wise at the time. He insulated himself from the consequences of his actions, believing that what happened in the courtroom had no bearing on his life outside of it. The abstract concept of justice was less important than the tangible reality of his family's well-being. But the cycle has a long memory. The released murderer, emboldened by his escape from justice, did not reform. He faded back into the city's criminal underworld, his capacity for violence undiminished. Years passed. Judge Ferren's son, now a young man, was walking home one evening from a late university class. It was a random act, a mugging gone wrong on a street that was supposed to be safe. A brief struggle, a flash of violence, and the young man was left bleeding on the pavement. The perpetrator was caught days later, his face familiar from old case files. It was the same man Judge Ferren had set free all those years ago. The irony was so direct, so crushingly perfect, that it defied belief. It was not a random tragedy, it was an echo. The violence the judge had unleashed back into the world had found its way home, delivered with a devastating precision. The man he had deemed worthy of freedom had stolen the future of his own son. Ferren, a man who had manipulated the law to his own benefit, now found himself powerless before it. His wealth and connections could not turn back time. He was confronted with the most absolute form of repercussion, a consequence so personal and so direct that it shattered his pragmatic worldview, leaving only the hollow agony of his choice. Fire Chief Costa was a testament to the power of political connections over professional competence. He was not a firefighter by trade, he was a bureaucrat, appointed to his post as a reward for his loyalty to a powerful political faction. His primary skill was not managing emergencies, but honestly navigating the complex currents of patronage. He understood that his job was not to enforce the fire code rigorously, but to apply it selectively. When the owner of a new luxury hotel, a cousin of the magnate Alex, offered a substantial bribe to overlook a series of glaring safety violations, Costa saw it as business as usual. He signed the inspection certificates, collected his fee, and moved on. The hotel was a glittering jewel in the city's skyline, but it was also a death trap. It lacked adequate sprinkler systems, its fire exits were poorly marked, and it used flammable decorative materials forbidden by law. When a small electrical fire started in the kitchen, it spread with terrifying speed. Dozens of guests were trapped and perished in the Inferno. In the investigation that followed, Costa expertly deflected blame. He spoke of unforeseen circumstances and faulty wiring, using the official language of tragedy to mask his own criminal negligence. He survived the scandal, his position secure, his bribe money safely invested. He had profited from chaos and had paid no price. Years later, Costa and his family were vacationing in a scenic mountain town, seeking refuge from the city's summer heat. It was a peaceful retreat, until the sky turned a smoky orange. A massive forest fire, the same one that began near an illegal logging operation, was sweeping through the dry landscape. The blaze was managed by the Regional Forestry Department, an agency crippled by budget cuts and led by the incompetent Ahmet. The response was slow, disorganized, and utterly ineffective. The fire, which should have been contained, grew into an unstoppable monster, consuming everything in its path and cutting off all escape routes from the town. Costa, the man who had once held the power of life and death over others through his neglect, was now utterly powerless. He was just another terrified citizen, trapped with his family, waiting for a rescue that might never come. He was at the mercy of the same broken system that he was a part of. The fire chief, who failed to prevent a fire in a building, now faced his own personal inferno in a forest. The cycle had delivered a consequence that was not just punitive, but poetic. The very incompetence and corruption he had exploited for personal gain had circled back, trapping him in a roaring blaze of his own making. The architect, a man named Lev, was a fraud, but a successful one. He had purchased his diploma and his license through a shadowy broker who specialized in creating legitimate-looking credentials for the unqualified. Lev possessed a raw talent for design, but he lacked the rigorous technical knowledge of engineering and material science that his profession demanded. He compensated for this deficiency with charm and connections. He was hired by Alex's company to design a prestigious high-rise apartment building. To maximize the project's profitability, he collaborated with contractors to use substandard steel and a cheaper, weaker mix of concrete, falsifying the material reports that he himself was meant to verify. The building went up, a sleek tower of glass and false promises. It became a symbol of the city's prosperity, its apartments sold to wealthy families who believed they were buying into a world of safety and luxury. Lev's career soared. He was celebrated as a visionary, his lack of genuine expertise hidden behind a portfolio of beautiful but structurally unsound buildings. He felt no guilt. In his mind, he was simply playing the game by the new rules. He built a comfortable life, marrying and having a daughter whom he adored. He provided for her what he believed was the best of everything, a world built on a foundation as unstable as his own creations. One afternoon, his daughter was at a birthday party held on the balcony of a municipal community center. It was an old building, one that had suffered from years of deferred maintenance, its budget siphoned off by corrupt officials. As the children played, a support beam, rusted and weakened by neglect, finally gave way. The balcony tilted violently, a section of it collapsing to the ground below. Lev's daughter was among the injured, her leg badly broken in the fall. The incident was a small headline in the city's daily catalogue of failures, just another example of decaying public infrastructure. For Lev, however, it was a cataclysm. The architect who cut corners on structural integrity for profit now saw his own child harmed by the very same kind of negligence. The universe, it seemed, had a dark sense of humor. He had built a private world of supposed safety for his family, funded by the risks he had imposed on others. But he could not insulate them from the public world of decay that his own actions helped perpetuate. His daughter's pain was a direct reflection of his professional sins. He was forced to confront the terrifying reality that in the world he helped create, no place was truly safe, and the next collapse was never more than a moment away. Ahmet was the director of the forestry department, a position for which he had no qualifications. He was a city man, a career administrator, who honestly knew more about spreadsheets than soil erosion. He received the appointment as a favor, thanks to the influence of his uncle, Judge Ferren. Ahmet understood his role was not to protect the forests, but instead to facilitate their exploitation. So, when a timber company, the same one funded by the criminal his uncle had freed, came to him with a proposal to log in a protected watershed, he readily agreed. In exchange for a generous kickback, he signed the permits and rezoned the land, ignoring the warnings of the few veteran rangers left in his department. The logging operation was reckless. The company clear-cut vast swathes of land, causing massive soil erosion and really disrupting the delicate ecosystem. They left behind a tinderbox of dry slash and debris, creating the perfect conditions for a wildfire. Ahmet, busy enjoying the fruits of his corruption in the city, gave it little thought. The forests were just an abstract concept to him, a resource on a map to be sold to the highest bidder. He was completely disconnected from the real-world consequences of his decisions, blind to the chain reaction he had set in motion. He had sold the land's future for his own present comfort. The inevitable fire, when it came, was catastrophic. But the cycle's repercussion was not limited to the flames. The clear-cutting in the watershed had a secondary, slower-moving effect. With the trees gone, there was nothing to hold the topsoil in place. When the seasonal rains arrived, they washed tons of nutrient-rich earth into the region's main river, the same river that supplied the agricultural plains downstream. The water became thick with silt, and the farmland, which had been fertile for generations, was slowly choked by a layer of sterile sediment. Crop yields plummeted. The land was dying. Ahmet's family for generations had owned a small farm in those very plains. It was a legacy, a piece of his heritage he had always taken for granted, managed now by his aging parents. The farm's production began to dwindle. The soil grew barren, unable to sustain the crops it once had. Ahmet, the forester who had sold the trees that protected the watershed, was now watching his own family's land turn to desert. The harvest was barren. He had authorized the destruction of the forest upstream, and the consequence had flowed downriver directly to his own doorstep, poisoning his family's roots and destroying his inheritance. Elisa knew she could not storm the gates of power. Alex was a man insulated by layers of wealth, security, and influence. He was a fortress, inaccessible to ordinary citizens. A direct accusation would be dismissed as the ravings of a conspiracy theorist, and honestly, she would be silenced before she could even present her findings. Her weapon was not outrage or emotion. It was information. Her approach had to be as cold and calculated as the system she was trying to expose. She needed to get into the room with him not as an accuser, but as a consultant. She would offer him not a threat, but a unique and valuable market analysis. The market in this case was chaos itself. She spent a week crafting the perfect bait. She composed a formal professional email sent from a generic business address she created. The subject line was intentionally sterile: a confidential analysis of systemic risk and asset vulnerability. In the message, she did not mention corruption, Bridges, or her father. Instead, she spoke the language of Alex's world. She wrote of cascading failure events, unforeseen correlated risks, and predictive models for non-financial asset depreciation. She hinted at a new methodology for forecasting operational disruptions, a tool that could offer a significant competitive advantage to a man whose empire was built on managing risk, or so he thought. She attached a single redacted chart showing a correlation between two seemingly unrelated corporate failures, a teaser for the larger truth. To her surprise, the response came within 48 hours. It was not from Alex himself, but from his executive assistant, a woman with a name as sharp and efficient as her tone. The email was brief. Mr. Karras is intrigued. He can offer you 15 minutes tomorrow at 4 p.m. Bring your full analysis. A non-disclosure agreement will be provided upon your arrival. Elisa's heart hammered against her ribs. It had worked. The Magnate, ever vigilant for a new edge, a new way to quantify and control the world, had taken the bait. He believed he was about to receive a tool to further his dominance. He had no idea he was inviting the ghost of his own creation in for a meeting. Elisa prepared meticulously, her focus absolute. She printed her most compelling charts and graphs, binding them in a sleek, professional-looking portfolio. Each page was a carefully chosen piece of the puzzle, designed to lead him down a path of cold, undeniable logic. She was not going to meet him as a grieving daughter seeking justice. She was going as a data analyst presenting a terrifying discovery. She was an oracle, but her prophecies were not divined from smoke and mirrors. They were born from spreadsheets and statistical models. She would show him the future, a future he had written for himself, and she would let the data speak for itself. Alex's office was on the top floor of the tallest skyscraper in the city, a perch from which he could literally look down on the world he had shaped. The room was a monument to minimalist power. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a panoramic view of the urban sprawl, and the scale of it all was definitely meant to intimidate. Alex himself was exactly as Elisa had imagined, impeccably dressed, radiating an aura of absolute control. He did not rise to greet her. He simply gestured to the chair opposite his vast, empty desk. His eyes were cold, appraising. "You have 15 minutes, he said, his voice calm and devoid of warmth. "Impress me." Elisa did not speak of morality. She did not mention her father. She opened her portfolio and began her presentation in a steady, measured tone. She started with the abstract, showing him network graphs of seemingly unrelated corporate entities. She pointed out hidden dependencies, shared board members, and complex financial links he likely already knew. This was familiar territory for him, a warm-up. Then, she began to overlay the disaster data. "Here," she said, pointing to a node representing the company that supplied the faulty steel for the bridge, "is a primary failure point." She then traced the line to his own holding company. "And here is the financial beneficiary." She moved methodically from one tragedy to the next: the hotel fire, the collapsed high-rise, the contaminated food scare. For each event she presented a simple two-part diagram. On one side was the corrupt act, the bribe, the fake license, the ignored regulation. On the other was the disaster. And in the middle, she drew the lines of connection, the flow of money and influence that led directly back to his corporate empire. She was not accusing him of murder. She was presenting a flowchart of consequence. "Your operations have a consistent, if unstated, externality," she said, using his language. "Catastrophic systemic failure." Alex listened, his expression unchanged. He was a man used to being presented with bad news, with risks and liabilities. He likely saw this as an elaborate shakedown, a prelude to a demand for money. He watched her, a flicker of cynical amusement in his eyes. He saw a smart, ambitious young woman who had done her homework. He did not yet see the true nature of her warning. He saw the network of corruption she was exposing not as a flaw, but as the very architecture of his success. She was showing him how his machine worked, and he felt a grudging respect for her thoroughness, still blind to the fact that she was about to show him how that same machine was programmed to destroy him. Having laid the foundation, Elisa moved to the heart of her argument, the repercussion cycle. "This is not simply a map of influence," she explained, her voice steady. "It is a predictive model." She laid out another chart, this one showing the time lag between a corrupt act and a consequential disaster. "The cycle is accelerating," she stated, her finger tracing a steepening curve. "The density of the network has reached a critical point. The system is becoming unstable. The chaos is no longer diffusing randomly. It is beginning to feed back on itself, following the established pathways of influence." This was the turning point. She was moving from history to prophecy. She brought up the recent forest fire. "Let's examine this as a case study," she said. She showed him the appointment of the incompetent forestry director, Ahmet. She linked Ahmet to his uncle, Judge Ferron. Then she pulled up the judge's old case file, the acquittal of the slumlord. She showed how that slumlord then funded the timber company that lobbied Ahmet. "The judge's act of corruption years ago created the conditions for this fire," she said. "But the cycle is not linear." She then pointed to another name connected to the original hotel fire investigation, Alex's own cousin, the hotel owner who had bribed the fire chief. The fire chief whose own family was now trapped by the forest fire. The consequence of one corrupt act enabled another, which circled back to harm the family of a party involved in a completely different corrupt act, Elisa summarized. "It is not karma, it is statistics. Your network of influence is now also your network of vulnerability. The poison you inject into one part of the system will inevitably circulate until it finds its way back into your own veins." She looked him directly in the eye, her professional mask momentarily slipping to reveal the cold fire beneath. "This is no longer a risk you can manage. It is a mathematical certainty. The cycle is closing in." She saved her final, most chilling point for last. "My model predicts, with a 78% probability, a new repercussion event within the next 30 days. The originating vector is a series of bribes and regulatory bypasses in the agricultural and food supply sector." She paused, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. "The target of the cycle is always linked to the perpetrator. The statistical focus of the next event is not a stranger. It is someone within your immediate network, your family." She did not say it as a threat, but as a clinical, unavoidable diagnosis. She was a doctor telling a patient that the disease he had ignored for years was now terminal. Alex's composure finally cracked. It was not a dramatic break, but a subtle shift. The cynical amusement in his eyes was replaced by a flash of genuine anger. He saw her now not as an analyst, but as a threat. He leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. "This is an impressive performance," he said, the words dripping with contempt. "You have woven together a series of unfortunate coincidences and dressed them up as a grand theory. It is imaginative. It is also insulting." He saw her words as an attack on his control, an affront to the very foundation of his power. He believed he was the master of the system, not a future victim of it. "You speak of cycles and statistics," he continued, rising from his chair to pace before the window, a dark silhouette against the city. "I speak of reality. The world is chaotic. It is messy. Weak people fail. Strong people succeed. That is the only cycle that matters. You see patterns where there are none because you are looking for someone to blame for your own misfortune. I know who you are, Eliza. I know about your father. You are driven by grief, and it has clouded your judgment. You are trying to make sense of a senseless world, and you have invented this fantasy to comfort yourself." He was dismissing her, not just her theory, but her entire being. He reduced her painstaking research to a simple psychological crutch. In his mind, he had already won the exchange. He had unmasked her motivation and, in doing so, invalidated her conclusion. He could not, would not, accept that the system he had mastered could turn against him. To do so would be to admit a fundamental loss of control, a concept that was anathema to him. His power was predicated on the belief that he was above the consequences, that his wealth was a shield that could deflect any misfortune. "Your 15 minutes are up," Alex said, turning back to face her, his composure restored. He was once again the Magnate, the untouchable man in the tower. He gestured toward the door. "Thank you for your analysis." It was entertaining. He dismissed her with a wave of his hand, a king dismissing a court jester. Elisa gathered her portfolio, her expression grim. She had presented him with the irrefutable truth, a statistical map of his own self-destruction, and he had looked at it and chosen to be blind. She walked out of the office, leaving him alone in his glass tower, a powerful man who had no idea he was already standing in the crosshairs of the inevitable. The prophecy Elisa delivered in Alex's office did not wait 30 days to manifest. It arrived just 3 days later, not as a dramatic headline on the news, but as a quiet domestic crisis. It began with a phone call. Alex was in a board meeting, orchestrating the takeover of a smaller rival, a routine display of his power. His personal phone, usually silent, vibrated against the polished table. It was his wife, her voice tight with a panicky edge that he had not heard in years. Their son Leo, a student at the city's most prestigious university, was ill. He had a fever, a severe stomachache, and a growing weakness that had alarmed her. It was probably just a stomach flu, she said, trying to reassure herself as much as him. But her tone betrayed a deeper fear. Alex felt a flicker of annoyance, not concern. He was a man who compartmentalized his life. Business was business. Family was separate. He delegated the problem, as he always did. He instructed his wife to call their private doctor to have the best care dispatched to their home immediately. He ended the call and returned his focus to the acquisition, the small matter of his son's health, a minor distraction already fading from his mind. He had built a world where problems like this were solved with a phone call, where his wealth was a universal key that unlocked any door and solved any inconvenience. A simple illness was nothing, but the private doctor was stumped. Leo's condition worsened, the fever spiked, he grew disoriented, his words slurring. The doctor, a man accustomed to treating the common colds and minor ailments of the rich, recommended a transfer to the city's main hospital. He needed access to better diagnostic equipment. The word hospital hung in the air, a place for ordinary people, a place outside of Alex's carefully controlled world. Alex, finally pulled from his fortress of business, arrived home to find his son pale and sweating, his strong athletic frame suddenly fragile. The confident young man he had seen just last weekend was gone, replaced by a frightened stranger. The source of the illness was a mystery. His wife recounted Leo's last few days. He had eaten at home mostly, but on Tuesday he had lunch at the university cafeteria. A sandwich, he had said, just a simple sandwich from a place that served thousands of students a day. A place supplied by the city's largest food service contractor, a contractor Alex knew well. His own company had given them a lucrative supply contract years ago, a deal greased by bribes and forged safety certificates. The memory surfaced for a moment, a fleeting, uncomfortable thought which he immediately dismissed. It was impossible. A coincidence. It had to be. The city's main hospital was a place Alex had only ever seen from the outside, a concrete block he passed in his chauffeur-driven car. Now he found himself walking its linoleum halls, the antiseptic smell a stark contrast to the perfumed air of his own life. The place, honestly, was a study in managed chaos, overcrowded, understaffed, and worn down by 1,000 daily compromises. Alex used his name, his power, to secure a private room for Leo, creating a small island of privilege in a sea of public suffering. He demanded the best doctors, the head of the department, and expected, as always, for the system to bend to his will. But the hospital operated on its own broken logic. The doctor assigned to Leo's case was a man named Aris. He was young, with a confident smile and a diploma from a top university hanging on his office wall. For a moment, Alex was reassured by these credentials, unaware that the diploma was a high-quality forgery purchased by the doctor's well-connected father. Dr. Aris examined Leo, ran a series of standard tests, and concluded it was a severe but straightforward case of bacterial gastroenteritis. He prescribed a powerful course of antibiotics, assuring Alex that his son would show improvement within 24 hours. He spoke with an authority that, in reality, masked a profound lack of genuine medical knowledge. But Leo did not improve. He grew weaker. The antibiotics had no effect because the diagnosis was wrong. The contaminant was not bacterial. It was a rare chemical toxin, a byproduct of a banned pesticide that had seeped into the food chain. A competent, experienced toxicologist would have recognized the subtle signs, the specific pattern of organ distress. But Dr. Aris was not competent. He was a product of the same corrupt system as the food contractor, a fake doctor, attempting to treat a case of industrial poisoning that was the direct result of a fake safety inspection. The cycle was closing in, its agents of chaos unknowingly collaborating to seal Leo's fate. Alex watched the numbers on the monitors beside his son's bed, numbers that refused to obey his commands. He made frantic calls, trying to leverage his influence. He offered to fly in specialists from other countries. He demanded new tests, second opinions, but he was trapped in the hospital's slow, bureaucratic machine. The equipment needed for the more advanced tests was undergoing maintenance, a euphemism for being broken. The senior specialist was unavailable, likely working at a private clinic for cash-paying patients. Every door Alex tried to force open was rusted shut with the same incompetence and negligence that he himself had fostered in the wider world. In his entire life, Alex had never encountered a problem that money could not solve. It was his superpower, his religion. Money bought him loyalty, influence, and insulation from the harsh realities of the world. Now, sitting in the sterile quiet of his son's hospital room, he was discovering, painfully, the limits of his faith. He offered the hospital administrator a donation that could rebuild an entire wing. The administrator smiled, promised to do his best, and did nothing. The system was just too broken to be fixed by a single injection of cash. The rot was in the bones, in the culture of apathy and neglect. He felt a terrifying impotence creeping in, a feeling so foreign it was physically nauseating. His wealth was worthless. He could not bribe a chemical toxin to leave his son's body. He could not pay a fake doctor to suddenly acquire real knowledge. He could not write a check that would magically repair a broken diagnostic machine. or undo years of systemic decay. The very tools he had used to build his empire, money, power, and influence, were useless against the consequences of that empire's construction. He was a king locked out of his own castle. His keys suddenly turned to dust in his hand. The words of the data analyst Elisa echoed in his mind. The statistical focus of the next event is not a stranger, it is someone within your immediate network, your family. He had dismissed her as a grieving girl, a fantasist. Now her prophecy had become his reality. He saw the chart she had shown him, the one linking agricultural corruption to a future repercussion. He remembered the name of the food supply company, the one he had helped bypass safety regulations. He was standing in the middle of her statistical model, a living data point in her horrifying equation. The chaos was not random. It was targeted. It was personal. He looked at his son, tethered to machines that beeped in a rhythm of failure, and the true horror of his situation began to dawn on him. He had created this, not intentionally, not with malice, but with 1,000 small acts of self-interested corruption. He had profited from a system that produced faulty steel, fake architects, and contaminated food. He had always imagined the consequences of these actions falling on faceless others, the anonymous victims of a distant tragedy. He never imagined that one day the consequence would have a name, and that name would be Leo. The man who believed he controlled everything was now completely powerless. The carefully constructed world Alex had built for himself and his family was unraveling, thread by thread. His wife sat by Leo's bedside, her face a mask of grief and confusion, her faith in her husband's omnipotence shattered. His daughter, called home from her studies abroad, watched him with a new, questioning look in her eyes. The image of the infallible patriarch, the man who could fix any problem, was dissolving into that of a helpless, desperate father. His authority was an illusion, and the chaos was stripping it away. He paced the hospital corridor, his mind racing. He tried to think of it as a business problem, a hostile takeover of his son's health. He needed a new strategy, a different kind of leverage, but there was none. He was trapped in a system of his own making. The corrupt judge he had paid off was the uncle of the incompetent forester. The fire chief he had bribed was a friend of the hospital administrator. The fake architect he had hired was the cousin of the city official who appointed the fake doctor. It was a closed loop, a web of complicity. He had seen it as a network of power. Now he saw it for what it was, a web of destruction. The final blow came not from a doctor but from a nurse, an older woman with tired eyes that had seen too much. She quietly pulled him aside. "The antibiotics aren't working," she said, her voice low. "Dr. Aris is too proud to admit he's out of his depth. Your son is being poisoned by something in his food. I have seen this before. We don't have the right tests here, and we don't have the right medicine." She was telling him a truth that his money could not buy and his influence could not silence. She was giving him the diagnosis that the official channels, clogged with incompetence, had failed to provide. In that moment, Alex understood. The system he had built to serve him would now kill his son. Its inefficiency, its corruption, its fundamental brokenness, all the features from which he had profited, were now an insurmountable wall between Leo and the cure he needed. He could not go through the system. He could not go around it. The only way to save his son was to break it, to shatter the entire edifice of lies and expose the rotten roots from which it had grown. The Magnate, the master of a corrupt universe, was faced with a terrible choice. Let his son be consumed by the chaos, or turn on the very system that had made him who he was. The sterile silence of the hospital corridor became Alex's crucible. The echoes of his past decisions, once distant and muffled, now screamed in his ears. He saw the face of Elisa, her cold statistical prophecy transformed into the warm, failing flesh of his own son. He saw the network she had mapped, not as a chart on a piece of paper, but as the very architecture of his personal hell. The choice before him was stark, stripped of all complexity. He could cling to the power and wealth he had accumulated, and in doing so, sacrifice his son to the broken system that had generated it. Or he could save his son, and in doing so, set fire to his entire world. It was a choice between his creation and his blood. For a man like Alex, this decision was a fundamental undoing of his own identity. His entire life had been a relentless pursuit of control, an exercise in bending the world to his will. To admit defeat, to concede that his power was an illusion, was a death of its own. He thought of the empire he had built, the network of favors and debts, the intricate web of complicity that held the city in its grasp. To expose it would mean his own ruin. He would face lawsuits, criminal charges, and the vengeful wrath of every other powerful figure he would be forced to implicate. He would lose everything he had ever worked for. But then, he would look through the small window in the door to Leo's room. He saw the boy's chest rising and falling in shallow, labored breaths. He saw the fear in his wife's eyes. In that moment, the abstract concepts of wealth, status, and empire crumbled into dust. They were meaningless artifacts compared to the primal biological imperative to protect his child. The magnate, the titan of industry, the master of the game, was gone. All that remained was a father, terrified and desperate, willing to pay any price. The choice was never really a choice at all. What is an empire to a man who has lost his heir? He made his decision not with a roar of defiance, but with a quiet, soul-crushing resignation. He understood that the only way to fight the poison was with an antidote of pure, unvarnished truth. The system was a fortress of lies, and it could only be brought down by a truth so massive and undeniable that it would shatter the foundations. He, Alex, was the only one who held that truth. He was the architect of the rot, and therefore he was the only one who could provide the blueprint for its demolition. He had to become the very thing he despised, a whistleblower. He had to turn against himself. Alex's first action was not a press conference or a call to a prosecutor. It was a call to Elisa. He summoned her not to his office, but to a neutral, anonymous cafe far from the centers of power. When she arrived, she found a different man from the one who had arrogantly dismissed her days before. The veneer of control was gone, replaced by a raw, haggard exhaustion. He did not offer pleasantries. He simply said, "My son is dying, you were right. It was a confession, an unconditional surrender." "Tell me what you need," he said. "Every document, every name, every offshore account, every bribe. I will give you everything. You will be the cartographer. I will be your guide through the wreckage." He understood that he could not be the face of this revelation. His confession would be seen as a self-serving attempt to escape justice. The truth had to come from an unimpeachable source, a victim of the system, not its creator. Elisa, with her data, her integrity, and her personal stake in justice, was the perfect vessel. Together they began the painstaking work of building the case. Alex unlocked his encrypted files, dictated names and dates from memory, and detailed the anatomy of deals that had, until now, existed only in secret handshakes and whispered agreements. He was methodically cataloguing his own sins, each one a nail in his own coffin. The first stone he provided was the most damning. The full, unredacted records of the food supply company responsible for his son's illness. It included the original safety reports that had been falsified, the records of the bribes paid to public health officials, and the internal memos acknowledging the use of banned chemicals. It was a perfect, self-contained example of the cycle, a direct line from corporate crime to human consequence. Elisa took the information, and working with a small group of trusted underground journalists, released it. The story broke not on the mainstream news, which was controlled by Alex's peers, but online, where it spread like wildfire. The fallout was immediate and explosive. The public, long accustomed to vague explanations for their suffering, were now given a villain with a name and a crime with a receipt. The food company's stock plummeted. The public health officials were suspended. The story was too big, too well documented to be ignored. It was the first crack in the dam. For Alex, it was a small, agonizing victory. The exposure forced the system to act. A specialist, an actual expert, was finally called to the hospital. A proper diagnosis was made. A treatment plan, using medicine that had to be flown in from another country, was started. He had traded a piece of his empire for a chance at his son's life. The film does not end with a clean victory. It does not show Alex redeemed or the system magically healed. It ends with a beginning, a terrifying and uncertain first step on a long road. Leo survives, but his recovery is long and arduous, a permanent reminder of the system's poison. Alex, having turned state's witness, is sequestered under heavy guard, his life a claustrophobic series of depositions and threats. He has unleashed a storm, and now he is in its eye, having sacrificed his freedom for his son's future. He is no longer powerful, only infamous. His former allies now want him dead, and the public he helped to expose sees him not as a hero but as a monster who only acted when the consequences arrived at his own door. Elisa continues her work. The data Alex provided is a treasure trove, the source code for a generation of investigations. She has become a reluctant leader, a symbol of resistance, but she knows that exposing one network, even one as vast as Alex's, is not enough. The rot is too deep. For every corrupt official they expose, another, just as hungry, waits to take their place. The system was not created by one man, and it cannot be destroyed by one man's confession. The culture of corruption, the normalization of the small bribe, the acceptance of incompetence, these things remain. The rotten roots are still in the soil. The final theme is a stark and somber warning. The repercussion cycle is not a force that can be defeated. It is a fundamental law of a closed, corrupt system. It is a self-correcting mechanism that will continue to operate as long as the conditions for its existence are met. Until society rebuilds itself on a foundation of merit, integrity, and shared responsibility, the cycle will continue. It will find new architects of chaos, new networks of influence, and it will deliver its consequences with the same unsettling poetic precision. No one, not even the most powerful, can ever be truly safe in a world they have allowed to decay. There is, however, a fragile glimmer of hope. It lies not in the powerful man's confession, but in the seed of awareness that has been planted. People have seen the pattern. They have been shown the blueprint of their own suffering. The illusion of bad luck has been shattered, replaced by the hard knowledge of cause and effect. The fight for a just society is a perpetual one, a constant struggle against the entropy of greed and apathy. The cycle of chaos is unbreakable, but by valuing integrity, by demanding accountability, by tending to the health of the whole, we can weaken its power. We can choose to stop feeding the machine that is designed to consume us all.